I have a PopCross design challenge for all of you, and all of the art submitted for it will be shown in an episode on this channel in about a month. Plus, I'll be giving away PopCross hoodies to some of my favorite submissions. But I don't want to front load this episode with explanations, so I'll get into more details about the actual challenge later in the episode. What I'm going to be drawing today is my own version of this design challenge, which may differ from yours, where I'm going to be taking my favorite kinds of characters to draw, Spider-Man characters, and mashing each of them up with 2 or 3 other characters whose designs I absolutely love that are from different movies, shows, video games, franchises, whatever. These pop culture crossovers make absolutely no logical sense, but I just thought design-wise they would end up looking really cool, and that's kind of the point of this whole challenge. So let's see how that goes, shall we? Let's go!
Hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show.
Across the Spiderverse, there are hundreds if not thousands of different versions of wall-crawling heroes with varying spider-like abilities. One of the many is Gwen Liang, better known to her world as the Cryo-Arachnid. Of course, that name only came to her after she gained her extra abilities. You see, Gwen was born with a unique skill set that she trained with through her entire childhood. Her father was the chief of a group called the Lin Kuei, who were a secret division of the police that worked in the shadows, taking on crime too dangerous for regular frontline officers. The Lin Kuei had special elemental abilities, most commonly cryomancy, allowing them to create and control ice to use against their opponents. The criminal underworld feared these elite soldiers, and Gwen's father in particular, who gained the name Sub-Zero as a result of his ferocity and unquestioned record for taking down targets he sought. Save of course for one group that constantly evaded him. They were called the Terena Ryu, and they were led by a secretive figure simply known as the Scorpion. Rumors said that he had a skeletal head under his mask and a tail that could spew fire. Gwen had been told that they were a ruthless, evil group that hunted the powerful creatures called Pokemon that roamed the wilds outside New York City. They'd capture these poor creatures and dissect them, trying to harvest their abilities and give them to human beings. By the time Gwen was in her last year of high school, she was eager to start hunting down the Terena Ryu. She'd become a highly skilled cryomancer and was planning to graduate and go straight to the police academy to eventually become an official member of the Lin Kuei. Though her best friend, Peter Syzoth, had always discouraged this. He of course wasn't allowed to know about the Lin Kuei, but he believed that the police forces in their city were hugely corrupt and that Gwen would just be sucked into a life of being a badge-wearing crook herself. She didn't reveal anything about her father or the Lin Kuei, but would always push back against Peter's protests. Even with their disagreements though, they were both accepting of each other's differing views and stayed close friends, though neither of them actually knew all the details about each other's life paths. You see, near the end of high school, Gwen saw Peter sneaking away early one day. She had her last period off, so she started following him, planning to just jump out and surprise him as a joke, until she saw him getting picked up by an unmarked van, and inside, she saw the others he was joining were wearing Terena Ryu masks. She was deeply concerned for his safety and horrified by the idea that he might actually be one of them, so she pulled out a tracking device from her bag that her father had given her in case she ever saw Terena Ryu activity and tossed it onto the van as it was driving off. She knew she should have told her father and sent him and the Lin Kuei after them, but she was too scared for what they'd do to Peter if it turned out he was mixed up with this group. Instead, she got on her bike and followed them herself. It was nearly a 2-hour ride for her out of the city to a swampy forest. She eventually got off her bike and lurked farther into the woods until she found a wooden temple-like building guarded by 2 Terena Ryu, who were only partially human, each having traits of some of the Pokemon Gwen had heard lived out in these woods. She utilized her covert training to sneak around them and get into the building, expecting to see horrible experiments being done on Pokemon. But instead, she saw the creatures roaming about freely in the facility. There were a few people running tests on them and drawing blood or taking scale samples, but none of the Pokemon were chained or behind bars. Instead, they seemed to be enjoying their time with the Terena Ryu, participating willingly in the tests. Gwen snagged a vial off one of the shelves near her as she went through the facility that said Swampert serum on it, to take as evidence, but continued through the site, confused and still looking for Peter. When she finally found him, she was terrified to see that he was knelt right before a man in a yellow mask and outfit with a long scorpion tail that was spewing flames. The man was just handing Peter a chalice full of green liquid and asking him if he accepted the responsibility of drinking the Tyranitar serum. He said yes, and drank the liquid. As soon as he finished, his body started to shift. His skin became green and hardened into armored plates. He grew a tail himself and let out a bellowing roar as Gwen saw her friend, Peter Sizoff, become a reptilian monstrosity. Though moments later, he shifted back into his old form. He then showed that he could control it, shifting in and out with ease, changing different parts of his body at a time. He then bowed to the scorpion and was dismissed. At this point, Gwen had no idea what to think. She realized that she had never actually seen any evidence of the Tyrannoryu harming anyone or anything. She'd just heard stories for so long from her father about how awful they were. She needed to figure this out for herself. She eventually left the facility and biked back home, still carrying the vial she'd swiped. She debated what to do next, whether she should show the vial to her father and tell him what she'd seen, or confront Peter, but eventually, more so than anything else, her curiosity got the better of her. Could these vials actually give anyone abilities like a Pokemon, like what she'd seen happen to Peter? On a whim, she drank the vial herself, and while her body didn't go through any obvious physical changes like Peter's did, she soon found that she had a new set of abilities. And more interestingly still, they'd blended with her cryomancy powers. She became able to shoot streams of water from any part of her body instead of just ice, and shift its density into different states, even able to condense it into a fluid-like strand that she could freeze to buildings and swing from. She also became stronger and faster, and able to create quakes in the ground by slamming her hands onto it. It was an incredible set of new gifts, but she still didn't know what to do with them. If her father had been lying to her about the Tyrannoryu, what else could he have been lying about? She had to investigate both the Tyrannoryu and the Lin Kuei further, but she couldn't do it as Gwen Liang. She'd have to create a new secret identity, one with which she could look into both sides without risking her possible career in the Lin Kuei if it turned out they were actually as good as she'd always been told. And so came about the birth of the Cryorachnid. In the year 2099, Miguel O'Hara was dreading his summer, heading off to camp. He was a top-tier student who spent much of his time in labs at school, experimenting and learning for the pure joy of it. He had already jumped ahead 3 years in his schooling and was being eyed by the Alchemax Corporation for an internship as soon as he turned 16 in a couple years. His parents loved how much he thrived in a solo learning environment, but also thought he needed to add in a better balance of time with friends as well. He left the bustling city of Nouveau York to go to a nature camp, where he still spent little time interacting with other kids. Instead, to the frustration of the camp counselors, he'd often sneak off into the woods and see if he could study the wildlife and flora. But eventually, this led to him finding something that would change his life forever. On one of his outings, he came to a clearing in the trees. He would have simply turned back, but soon noticed a purple light in the sky above him, a glowing object that seemed to be making computer glitches spark through the air around it as it was descending towards him. As it got closer, he saw that it was some kind of wristwatch device that stopped, hovering above the ground a few feet ahead of him. He cautiously raised his hand into the air near it, and while his hand started to look like it was glitching out itself, he didn't feel any different. He pushed closer and closer until he was able to grab the device out of the air, and as soon as he did, the glitching stopped. He investigated the device and even tried putting it on. When it was strapped in place, a voice spoke from it.
Target acquired. Sorry, kid. Lila returning to Earth 928B.
A white light illuminated on the watch, and another burst of glitches sprung forth, completely overtaking Miguel's body. When it all cleared, he found himself standing on the edge of a crumbling building. He looked out to see what seemed to be Nouveau York, but it was burning in purple flames and half of the buildings were completely leveled. Miguel's whole body shook as he scanned the scene. Then, soon he jumped as a clawed hand fell on his shoulder from behind. He whipped around to see an 8-foot-tall blue and red reptilian man standing next to him, looking almost proud at the destroyed city.
We have done all we can to this world. Now it's time to find another.
Before Miguel could ask what the being meant, its split-jawed mouth opened and chomped down onto Miguel's shoulder. He cried out in agony as the glitches erupted around him again, and when they disappeared, he was back in the clearing in the woods. The pain was gone, but he quickly tore back his shirt to see that there were indeed a set of faded bite marks. He also still had the watch on. He tried taking it off, but it wouldn't budge. He had no idea what to do, but started hoping that the strange object was just making him hallucinate somehow. He ran back to the camp and approached the main building to see a counselor, looking very displeased by his absence. The man came up and started yelling at Miguel to stop running off on his own. Miguel tried to interrupt and tell him what had just happened, but the man wouldn't listen. As the lecture went on, Miguel got more and more frustrated, and the glitching started again. The counselor clearly saw this and took a step back, and soon Miguel's body erupted into purple light and he was transformed into the very shape of the being that had bitten him in the other world. Miguel's body suddenly and instinctively lunged forward and grabbed the counselor by the neck, raising him high into the air. Miguel's mouth opened wide and a purple ball of flames started building up within it. The counselor shrieked and cried for help, and Miguel actually wanted to do the same. He could feel his body was about to, against his will, unleash a blast that would scorch this counselor to death. He focused as hard as he could on stopping it, and soon felt that his grip loosened ever so slightly. He focused harder and harder, and soon his hand opened and the counselor dropped just as the beam exploded from his mouth, shooting over the counselor's head and erupting a flaming hole through the roof of the camp building. Miguel soon found he was regaining more control, and he simply fled from the camp in fear, moving at incredible superhuman speeds. He got far enough away and started to focus on trying to change back. With every conscious thought, he could feel an underlying rebellion swirling through his subconscious, simply wanting to kill and destroy everything. But eventually, he was able to return to his normal self, apparently to the surprise of his watch.
Wow, kid, it's been a while since I found someone that could calm the virus. Good on you. You must be something special. Of course, I have thought that before.
It turned out Lila, his new wristwatch, was a barely willing herald of a virus from another dimension called the Weregarurumon. It was created by another world's Alchemax Corporation, intended to give people superhuman abilities using a digital virus manifested into physical reality. It had, in a way, succeeded, but also turned the infected person into a raging beast that wanted nothing more than to destroy whatever world it was in, then move on to another. The problem was it could only move through bodies of alternate versions of the originally infected person. It just so happened the original user was another dimension's Miguel Ishida. Lila had been invented by that world's Miguel in his infected state to seek out more Miguels across the multiverse. She was an advanced enough AI to have developed sympathy for those she sought out, but not advanced enough to overwrite her own base programming to stop seeking out new targets. So now, Miguel ran the risk of being overtaken at any moment in his life by this virus and going on a murderous rampage. But he wasn't about to just let himself become a tool for destruction. Using his own technological and biological know-how, and all the information Lila could provide, Miguel altered the device and created a serum that the device could administer to him once per day. Not only would it keep the creature from taking over his mind, but it would also allow Miguel to utilize the abilities himself. From there, he'd seek a more permanent solution, but in the meantime, he'd embrace the powers he'd been given and use them to protect his home city and investigate to see if his world's Alchemax was working on anything as dangerous as the virus he'd acquired from his alternate self.
Now for the actual instructions of the PopCross Design Challenge, which will be written out in much more thorough description in a Google Docs document linked in the description. Please read through that before submitting. But most important is the fact that there is only one place to submit for this challenge, a new email address I've created called popcrossdesignchallenge@gmail.com. I don't want submissions for this getting mixed in with community redraw submissions, so please only submit there for this challenge. And the purpose of this challenge is for you to set the intention going in to make the best piece of art you've ever made. Now, it doesn't have to actually end up being the #1 piece you've ever made, but it should be good enough to a point where you would happily show that thing to anyone and say, this is a representation of my current skill level as an artist. For the actual content of the drawing, what I want you to do is start by picking your absolute favorite character from pop culture to draw. Then I want you to pick a minimum of 2 other characters from different franchises to the first one you chose, characters that you absolutely love the designs of and are super inspired by, and you're gonna mash all of those characters up into a really weird and really cool pop culture crossover design. When you've got a piece you're very happy with, you're gonna then send it to popcrossdesignchallenge@gmail.com with 1 sentence about your favorite thing you did in this piece of art, 1 sentence on the next thing you're planning to improve on in your art going forward, and 1 social media link where you most often post your art. Because my 3 favorite submissions, along with getting a PopCross Studios hoodie sent to them, are going to get a shout out to that social media link, and I'll link it in the description and the pinned comment and stuff so that people can go check out more of your art. Again, a more thorough breakdown of the rules is linked in the description in that Google Docs document. Check it out, and I'm very excited to see what you all submit. One last thing, if you get a comment from someone pretending to be me saying that you've won something, do not believe it. That is a scam. I will only announce winners in the actual episode in a month. Okay, now back into more art.
Viles Stewart grew up in a city that loomed in an air of unrest. Brookzon was a borough of New Piltover, and any criminals that wanted to get away with their thefts or dirty dealings would often go to Brookzon to get things done. The authorities rarely came to that borough, and when they did, it was often because they'd been paid off and weren't actually there to help anyone but themselves. Viles spent a lot of her time picking fights with anyone that threatened to make her neighborhood a more dangerous place than it already was. Viles had more scars littering her body by the time she was in her late teens than anyone else in Brookzon, but at least she'd built up a reputation as someone not to be messed with. She wanted to keep the streets safe for herself, but even more so for her younger cousin, Gwen, who Viles had grown up with, basically as a sister. Viles herself wasn't enough of a crime deterrent to make any big, lasting changes, but she had at least made the few blocks around her and Gwen safer. She had indeed made a name for herself, and the only person any of the criminals in Brookzon feared more than Viles was a being that simply went by the Jinxed Spider. She was a chaotic superhero with spider-like abilities that would kill any criminals she caught in the midst of harassing citizens of Brookzon. Viles appreciated their home having a costume to protect her, but wasn't a fan of how murder-happy she was. Viles believed that even the worst criminals deserved to be put through the proper justice system to potentially go through some form of rehabilitation. This was just one example of Viles having strong core values and principles that, unbeknownst to her, had been traits noticed and observed by a being far from her own world. A guardian of the universe named Azimuth was seeking a new being to become a protector of Earth, and had narrowed his search to the pink-haired protector of Brookzon. She was courageous, strong, and had the moral fortitude he was looking for. But he needed a little extra nudge of proof that she was the right person to imbue with the gift he held. He eventually got that nudge when Viles found herself confronting a gang of punks wearing the markings of the Prowler. He was a masked gang leader who often ran criminal activity in Brookzon for the kingpin of crime in New Piltover, Silco Fisk. Viles was trying to bring the punks down, but was outnumbered and taking more hits than usual. That is, until the Jinxed Spider swung onto the scene. She leapt in and was clearly ready to take things too far. Viles had to keep fighting the goons while doing all she could to keep the Jinxed Spider from killing them. Both heroes were getting more and more frustrated with the situation, until, finally, the Jinxed Spider yelled out, "Would you back off, Viles? I'm trying to help you!" Hearing her own name come out of the vigilante's mouth, Viles knew exactly who it was under the mask. She whispered her name. Gwen? Hearing that, the masked hero took one more swing at a crook, then ran off. Viles was able to finish things up there, but then just waited for Gwen to come home. She had to wait a few days, but eventually her cousin returned, and they finally got to speak about what happened. Viles told her cousin that she wasn't angry she'd hidden her secret identity, and that she actually respected what Gwen was doing as the Jinxed Spider, but that she had to stop killing people. Gwen refused. She said that if the criminals weren't killed, they'd just keep getting let out of jail by Silco, and be right back in Brookzon soon after to hurt more people. Viles didn't get angry, but did stand her ground, and said that she was willing to help Gwen if a day came when she decided to stop killing. But until then, if Viles ever came across the Jinxed Spider at work again, she'd do all she could to stop her from taking any more lives. Gwen obviously wasn't happy with the response, but the Guardian Azimuth was watching and was impressed by her standing up for her morals. After the cousins parted ways that day, Azimuth came down to Earth and appeared before Viles. He told her that he was charged with observing many worlds of the universe, looking for worthy saviors to take on the powers of the Omnivert Core. By accepting responsibility to protect her world, she'd be given an Omni Ring, a device that would allow her to channel the abilities of an alien race and create crystalline light constructs across her body, and even fire them as projectiles. Viles was hesitant about her ability to protect a whole world when she couldn't even keep her own neighborhood safe, but Azimuth assured her that it was okay to start small. Saving even one person can make a huge impact, and she'd already proven that she could do that without any enhanced abilities from an Omni Ring. And so, she accepted, gaining new powers and even taking on a superhero persona similar to her cousins, so that she could quickly be seen as a hero in Bruxon, but also in the hopes that she could set a better example of how a spider-clad hero should act. She wanted Gwen to come around and join her in fighting crime the right way, but little did she know that Gwen's sanity was teetering on a thin line, as the serum that gave her her own abilities, which she'd stolen from Silco and the Prowler, damaged her mind as much as it empowered her body, and only time would tell if Viles could bring her cousin farther into the light, or if she'd fall deeper into the dark.
I don't know that I'd put any of these up as my #1 drawing of all time, but I would definitely confidently show these to someone and say this is a representation of where I'm at as an artist. I'm very excited to see all your versions of that as well. If you want more stuff like this, you might like my Spider-Man villains as Spider-Man episodes that I've done recently. Got a whole bunch of Spider-Man designs in there. Also, if you want the inks and high-resolution art from this episode, they're already up on the PopCross Studios Patreon because art and inks go up a day before a video is released, but I'll also put these up as posters on the PopCross Studios Teespring store as well. All that'll be linked in the description. It's also entirely possible that I do another episode like this before we get to the one in the month where I'll be doing the giveaways and showing off art and stuff. And I might do that one with Godzilla, because Godzilla is probably my other favorite character to draw, but I don't know, I have a lot of favorite characters. So give me some ideas for weird Godzilla or Spider-Man fusions, maybe Ben 10 fusions, I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you want to see. And besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note. And the one I'm going to use today is a nice simple one that I just heard in a compilation of motivational speeches, so I don't actually know who said it, but I thought it was really fun. It was just, if you can learn to operate in chaos, the world becomes Disneyland. Don't even feel like I need to elaborate on that one. It's just nice and fun and simple. I hope that's inspiring. I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Friday. Goodbye.